Lena always felt like an outsider. At school, her quiet nature and tendency to linger in the shadows made her invisible to most of her classmates. At home, it wasn't much different. Her parents were too absorbed in their own problems to notice the growing void inside her. She often escaped their weary gazes by wandering around her small, dreary neighborhood. One place in particular always called to her, a crumbling mansion at the end of Hollow Way. It loomed over the town like a decaying relic from another era, its broken shutters rattling even when there was no wind. Rumors about the mansion had circulated for years. Some said it was cursed. Others whispered about ghostly figures seen flitting past its cracked windows late at night. Nobody dared to enter the place, especially after a young boy from town vanished years ago near the property, never to be found again. But something about the mansion intrigued Lena. Maybe it was the mystery. Or maybe it was the way it stood, shunned by the world, much like herself. One moonless night, with a flashlight in hand and a black hoodie pulled tight over her head, Lena made her way to the mansion. The air was dense with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The wrought iron gate creaked open begrudgingly as she slid through, her heart racing in equal parts fear and excitement. The front door, splintered in half off its hinges, gave way with a low groan. The inside smelled worse than the air outside, a pungent mix of mildew, dust, and something faintly metallic. The beam of her flashlight broke through the suffocating darkness, illuminating long-forgotten furniture draped in cobwebs and peeling wallpaper that resembled tattered skin. She whispered to herself, "It's just an old house, that's all." But the house didn't feel old. It felt alive. With each step, the wooden floor beneath her sneakers creaked as if in protest. Lena's flashlight flickered briefly, plunging the room into darkness before relighting. She stopped, wary now. A faint sound drifted down from the second floor, a noise like soft whispers layered over distant breathing. "Hello," she called out instinctively. Her voice broke the unnatural stillness, but no response came. She gripped the flashlight tighter and took a deep breath. Her legs felt stiff, but she forced herself to climb the winding staircase. Each step seemed to stretch time, her pulse pounding louder and louder in her ears. The upper floor greeted her with a long, narrow hallway cloaked in darkness. Doors lined the corridor, some ajar, others shut tight. The whispers grew clearer now, though she couldn't make out the words. They weren't coming from any specific direction, they seemed to echo from the very walls. A bitter chill swept through the hall, ruffling her hoodie, as though unseen hands had brushed past her. She opened the nearest door. Inside was a bedroom, untouched yet disturbingly pristine compared to the rest of the mansion. A four-poster bed stood in the center, its faded canopy draped like a shroud. The walls bore ancient wallpaper of faded roses, and a cracked mirror hung lopsided above a dresser. Lena stepped in cautiously, her flashlight catching something on the mirror's surface, a smear, almost like a handprint. Who's there?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. The room remained still, but the whispers deepened, overlapping into a cacophony that tugged at her sanity. Then, faintly, she felt it, the undeniable sensation of being watched. Heart racing, Lena spun around and aimed her flashlight toward the doorway. No one was there. Yet the feeling lingered, oppressive and suffocating. When she turned back to the mirror, her breath caught in her throat. The reflection showed her own terrified face. But behind her, in the dim light, was the faint outline of a figure standing in the doorway, tall, formless, and wrong. She whirled around again. The doorway was empty. The floor beneath her groaned louder now, though she hadn't moved. It sounded as if the house itself was breathing. Panicked, she darted into the hallway, her footsteps echoing erratically as she sprinted toward the stairs. But the hall seemed longer than before, endless. Doors slammed shut behind her one after the other, the sound reverberating like gunshots. Lena cried out, her voice raw, but the house swallowed her screams as if savoring them. She felt the air grow thicker, pressing down on her. The walls no longer seemed still, they pulsed faintly, the faded wallpaper almost, rippling, like skin stretched over bones. The whispers had risen to desperate, frenzied pleas, though she couldn't tell if they begged for mercy or something far more sinister. Finally, she stumbled into a large room that hadn't been there before. The ceiling soared high, iron chandeliers hanging like skeletal remains. A circular table sat in the center, candles arranged in an unsettlingly deliberate pattern. On the walls, fragmented portraits stared down at her with half-faded eyes, their expressions distorting the longer she looked. "Why did you come here, Lena?" a voice rasped behind her. It wasn't loud, but its proximity made her blood run cold. She froze, too terrified to turn. How did this thing know her name? Her muscles finally obeyed as she swung around with the flashlight, only to find nothing behind her but the gaping emptiness of the room. The voice continued, closer now, as if it were inside her very head. "You felt it, didn't you? You've always felt different. Alone. Like you were meant to be here." "No," she shouted, though doubt clung to her voice. Her flashlight flickered again, and for a dreadful second, she stood in total darkness. When the light flared back on, the room was no longer empty. Around the table stood shadowy figures, faintly human in outline but distorted beyond recognition. Their heads snapped toward her in unison, and she felt something tighten around her chest. An invisible weight pressed her to the floor, forcing her to kneel. She gasped for air, clawing at her throat, but her movement slowed as though time itself was thickening like tar around her. The mansion wanted her. A realization swept through her like freezing water. The house wasn't just alive, it was sentient, and whatever force controlled it had been watching her for years, waiting for the right moment. Her life, her isolation, her pain, they had all led her here. The figures began to close in, their shapes less shadowy now, their faces identical to people she had seen throughout her life but utterly distorted, her face among them. Then, one final whisper reached her ears, barely audible but cutting through the din of overlapping voices. It was her voice, cold and mechanical, muttering two words that would haunt her final moments. "Welcome home." The light from her flashlight sputtered one last time, and went dark,